tuttered for. Eric Lavoie, a meticulous, methodical 34-year-old detective with an uncanny ability to detect even the smallest details. He's introverted, but sharp, with a deep sense of loyalty. Eric trusts his instincts, especially when something feels off. His world is about to unravel. Isolde Lavoie, Eric's wife, 31 years old. She's kind, artistic, and nurturing, but there's an icy distance between her and Eric that he can't explain. Lately, her behavior has changed, but Eric can't quite figure out how or why. Theo Montclair, a charismatic but mysterious 38-year-old entrepreneur. He exudes confidence, and his every word seems calculated. He's been increasingly present in Isolde's life, but Eric has always been wary of him. A gut feeling tells Eric that Theo is hiding something. Clara Dubois, Eric's colleague and confidant, a no-nonsense investigator who's skeptical of Eric's growing paranoia, but ultimately supportive. She's pragmatic, and unlike Eric, she doesn't let emotions cloud her judgment. Eric hadn't meant to notice it at first. The smell lingered, subtle, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't a smell that came from a bottle or a product he knew. It wasn't Isolde's usual perfume, the lavender scent that always calmed him after a stressful day. No, this was different. It was richer, deeper, almost woody. A complex fragrance that didn't belong in their home. It hit him one evening as he folded the laundry. A sharp, almost metallic note mixed with something faintly floral. Eric frowned, sniffing again, then tossed the shirt aside. He had been working long hours, and maybe his senses were just heightened. But the thought didn't sit right. That scent, it wasn't his. Isolde had been acting strangely lately. More distant, less engaged. Every time Eric tried to engage her in conversation, she'd seem distracted, her thoughts elsewhere. She'd smile, but it wasn't the same warm smile that once made him feel safe. It was forced, like she was pretending to be someone else. But the worst part? She was always late, always coming home after Eric had fallen asleep, or leaving before he'd woken up. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now tucked away, her fingers always swiping protectively when Eric walked by. Her silence was louder than any words. Eric didn't want to jump to conclusions. He loved her. And the last thing he wanted was to accuse her of something he couldn't prove. Yet something about the change in her made his chest tighten. The unfamiliar scent on her clothes only deepened his doubts. Then there was Theo Montclair, the man Isolde kept talking about. He was always at the yoga studio where she worked, always offering her advice, always there when Eric wasn't. He'd met Theo once, at a party a year ago. The man was charming, yes, but there was something cold beneath his polished exterior. A kind of detachment that Eric found unsettling. Days passed, and the feeling of something lurking in the background only grew. Eric couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched, even in his own home. It was a strange sensation, like being the observer instead of the observed. He began to notice things he hadn't before. The way Isolde's clothes now smelled faintly different when she returned home. The subtle shift in the way she kissed him goodnight. The empty moments when she wasn't looking at him, but at her phone. There was a growing sense that she was slipping away, but he couldn't pinpoint why or how. One day, after a late shift, Eric found himself standing in the kitchen, his mind racing. He'd meant to do the dishes, but instead, his gaze fell on Isolde's scarf hanging by the door. It smelled like Theo, sharp, spicy, with a hint of something more. Eric couldn't breathe. His instincts screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. It was no longer a vague suspicion. He knew. She had betrayed him. Eric had never been one for dramatic confrontations, but the truth clawed at him like a wild animal. The more he tried to suppress it, the more it screamed to be heard. His mind was a mess of questions. Why was she doing this? What had changed between them? What was the real story with Theo? That night, as Isolde came in from another late class, Eric stood by the door, his expression unreadable. He watched as she walked past him, casually tossing her bag onto the table, her hair still damp from the evening's activities. "You smell like him," Eric said, his voice calm, controlled. But beneath it was an edge, a sharpness that betrayed his racing thoughts. Isolde froze. Her face paled, and she immediately looked away, her hand trembling as she reached for her phone. The silence between them thickened, suffocating. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I don't know what you mean," Isolde stammered. She turned quickly, trying to mask her guilt with a forced smile. But Eric was no fool. He knew what he had found, and he knew what he had to do. "I know." He said quietly, his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "I know everything." Isolde's confession came quickly, but it didn't bring relief, just a sickening weight that pressed against Eric's chest. She spoke of Theo with an unsettling calmness, describing the affair as though it was something that had just happened. "Eric, I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Theo, he makes me feel alive again, something I haven't felt in a long time." Her words cut deeper than any betrayal. They revealed the depth of her emotional distance, the fracture that had quietly grown between them. But it wasn't just about Theo. There was something more, something darker. Eric could see it now. She wasn't just in love with another man. She was lost. As Eric listened to her talk, he realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a symptom of something much worse. The man she had fallen for, Theo, was dangerous. More than just an opportunistic lover, he had manipulated her into this. And the worst part? Theo had been playing this game long before Eric suspected anything. He had carefully positioned himself into their lives, drawing Isolde in slowly, subtly. The fragrance on her clothes wasn't an accident. It was his mark, a subtle reminder of what he had taken from Eric. The discovery left Eric with a choice. Let the truth shatter him completely, or find a way to reclaim his life. In the end, he did neither. He wasn't sure if he could ever forgive her, or if he even wanted to. But he knew one thing for sure. The scent of betrayal was now his to carry, and he would wear it like armor. Weeks passed. Eric moved out of their shared apartment, leaving behind the empty space that had once been a home. He never saw Isolde again. He didn't need to. The scent was gone, but the scars would remain. He could still smell it in the quietest of moments, the reminder of what he lost and what he would never forget.